On August 28, 1955, the death of a young African-American boy shocked the nation. 14-year-old Emmett Till was brutally murdered by two males after being accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. He was a Chicago native on a trip to Mississippi with no idea of his future brutal murder. Emmett Till's tragic death led to an uproar among the African American people, eventually becoming a powerful figurehead symbolizing the racial norms in the U.S., ultimately paving the way for social and political mobility for African Americans across the country. In the United States, the social standards that stood solidly during the 1950s established a divide based upon skin color. African Americans had it rough, as it was a period where Black people had little rights compared to the majority white population. The Southern Black community was painted as inferiors and limited to policies imposed by the Jim Crow segregation laws, which controlled their lifestyle and political participation. As America progressed after the time of war, the country still fell behind in including equal rights. African Americans were seen as unworthy of equal opportunity. With separate bathrooms, restaurants, and even drinking fountains, it was clear that the two social groups inhabited separate worlds. Young African Americans living in the North did not always understand the conditions in the South. Emmett Till, born on July 25, 1941 in Chicago, Illinois, grew up in the North. Till never knew his father, a private in the United States Army during World War II. Before Emmett Till traveled to Mississippi with his uncle, his mother tried to warn him of the social norms of the South. During his visit to Mississippi on August 28, 1955, Emmett Till supposedly whistled at a white woman in the grocery store, subsequently provoking two white males, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milan, to kidnap and brutally murder the young boy in the river. His body was so badly mutilated that it was almost unrecognizable. His death intensified the social standards at the time and caught the attention of the people. It encompassed the unreasonable racist treatment that African Americans endured. Till would soon become a beacon for change. Maybe Till Mobley opted for an open casket funeral as a huge political and social move.
I believe that the whole United States is mourning with me. And if the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
As a criminal defense attorney, when we look at crimes, we often try to put together a picture about what happened, and it takes a lot of hatred and a lot of rage to do the kind of violence that was done to Emmett Till. I think the shock of his death was compounded by the brutality of his death.
Despite the heartache that Mamie endured, she believed that the only way for the world to understand the horrors of racial discrimination was to bring his mutilated body to people. In response to the funeral, all people of color began to take political and social actions. Many African Americans believed that political change needed to happen, and it needed to happen now. Civil rights activists, particularly in Mississippi, were deeply affected by Till's death. Significant leaders from the NAACP joined the fight, organizing nationwide demonstrations to grow public demand for protection of civil rights for government action. Some of the most famous leaders of the movement to step forward, such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Medgar Evers. Emmett Till's tragedy would also greatly impact the identity of the African American society. African Americans started developing more rebellious and enraged behavior with nonviolent protest events. This included the famous Rosa Parks Act of Defiance on the bus in hopes of justice for Emmett Till. Many people felt the strong obligation to help move and enact change to the civil rights movement. Nonviolent movements including the Congress of Racial Equality, a group who took direct action to protest racial discrimination. The Freedom Rides, opposing segregation in buses. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, organization of the young people entering ranks of the civil rights movement. Political triumphs such as the Supreme Court win for African Americans through the Loving v. Virginia case, which announced that anti-miscegenation statutes as unconstitutional, invalidating laws against interracial marriages. Not to mention further victories such as the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which abolished racial, religious, and gender discrimination of the sale of housings. This act was also alongside one of the many wins with the help of the NAACP, making the civil rights movement an incredible victory for the United States and the first step in bringing equality amongst all minorities. Congress passed laws that provided permanent political and social rights for African Americans. This allowed positive changes regarding laws, social standards, and overall life for the African Americans, all of which still present themselves in contemporary America. The civil rights movement inspired other movements by minority groups, including the American Indian movement and Asian American movement, as they saw the success of African Americans as an opportunity to improve their situations. However, some believe that there are still major steps that need to be taken in society towards equality.
Currently, if we're looking at 2018, I feel like there's a little bit more discrimination, so Emmett Till's death is not as effective as it should be in this day and age. But I don't think Emmett Till's murder has gotten the praise that it needs, and a lot of the youth, like my little brother who is 18 now, so he's old enough to understand, he doesn't know much about this at all, and I think I played a part in it, but passing those stories down and storytelling and informing people about what has happened is not as prominent as it should be.
Current movements similar to the civil rights movement continue to allow African Americans to speak out about the struggles of Black people. The legacy of Emmett Till ignited the civil rights movement, hugely impacting the America we see today, opening up social and political aspects including rights for minorities, especially African Americans. His death allowed the uprising of the African American community and the fight which granted them revolutionary change. They won rights, laws, a path to social acceptance, but most importantly, they won their political righteousness. Emmett Till continues to stand as an influential historical figure, holding true to the journey of America. His legacy in both life and the civil rights movement is clear in American hearts and the laws that we have today. May the world remember the brutal tragedy, the triumph he brought to our country, and may the world continue to stand up for what is right.